Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Chris, and I'm here with Jason, and welcome back to Unchained Cinema. And this episode is going to be a little different in that we are talking about something that is involved in movies, but is not movies specifically. And we're going to be talking about our favorite soundtracks. This seems to be something that really took off in like the 80s and kind of went to its peak in the 90s. It's not something that I hear much about anymore. So I don't know if it's kind of a thing of the past, but I remember, you know, going to the Sam Goody or Record Town and looking at the soundtracks that came out, and that's how I got introduced to a lot of things. So we each picked out five soundtracks that kind of the cream of the crop from our experience with soundtracks. So I'm gonna throw it over to Jason. What is your first soundtrack?
Yeah, so just to piggyback real quick, because I do think that's interesting observation, Chris, that I've always been a big fan of soundtracks, but like you said, in the 80s and the 90s is when I really felt like it was like a focal point to get it out there. They used to cut TV spots or like little promos talking about the soundtrack of the movie. And you don't really ever see that anymore. You're exactly right. I mean, maybe that's out there. I never see it anymore. But it used to be a big thing because they would talk about a lot of the pop music of the day, making it onto the soundtrack, or like famous, conductors or composers like John Williams, things of that sort. Danny Elfman and things like that was like a big deal for music. And then also when I was in college in the '90s, that's when I really felt like I hit my pinnacle of like going and like being conscious and making a conscious effort to find soundtracks and add them to my collection. And there was a music store in the town I worked in. I'm sorry, the town I went to college in called Coconuts, and it was like a small independent, I believe, local music store that was in Indiana. And I go to Coconuts every weekend after college, and I would pick up different soundtracks. So, like you said, it kind of like really hit that fruition for me there in the '90s. So with that being said, the first soundtrack that I'm going to show is from Hans Zimmer, The Last Samurai. It is a beautiful, very haunting soundtrack. I love this movie. This is a Edward Zwick movie directed by Edward Zwick. And Tom Cruise, of course, Ken Watanabe. Also, you have, I believe, Koyuki is the main girl in it. But anyway, so this would be one of my first ones. This is a strictly orchestra-based soundtrack. You and I talked a little bit yesterday off camera about the difference between a pop culture, like music from bands and artists, opposed to a composer-based soundtrack. So we're going to put them both kind of today, for me at least, in the same category. But we could do 100 videos with just composer-based soundtracks and ones where they're like taken from pop culture, which the rest of them will be a mix, I think, of both for me. So the first one is this one right here, Hans Zimmer's The Last Samurai. So there you go.
It's funny that's your first choice because I literally just watched that movie last night.
Really?
I did.
What do you think about the soundtrack?
It set the tone for the movie exceedingly well.
Yes, and that's what it should do. I heard someone say, and I don't know where I heard it from. I can't give credit, but they said if the composer does the job the right way, is that you don't hear the music sometimes. Like it's just so powerful, and it's part of it. Doesn't take away from the movie. It just feels like it's a part of the experience. So I agree. Like when you hear the soundtrack, so like just it takes you into that world, it's doing its job. But if the soundtrack takes you out of it, you're like, okay, so now I'm watching a movie. So I kind of like that. So I agree.
Okay, so you went with more of the original score.
Right.
All right, so the difference being the original score is going to be the orchestral things that build the mood and things like that. So my first one is going to be a soundtrack, which is that other category. And this soundtrack opened the doors to a style of music that I hadn't really heard before. I was a heavy metal kid, but the Mortal Kombat soundtrack, the first Mortal Kombat soundtrack, opened me up to, oh God, Fear Factory, Typo Negative, which I couldn't get because the cover had the lesbians on it. My mom wasn't having that. Napalm Death.
I forgot all about that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Bloody Kisses album cover.
Yeah. Kiss on the album. Yep.
Mhm.
Uh huh.
And Geezer's project on there from Geezer Butler from Black Sabbath. He did a heavy metal project. Sister Machine Gun, Bile. And it also had some of the George S. Clinton stuff on there, which was part of the original score. So that's where you have the A Taste of Things to Come and the final combat, and I think it had the Mortal Kombat theme song on there, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah. I used to own that. So yes.
Yep, I had it on CD, and it was, ugh.
Dude,
It was an awakening
that
for
Mortal
me.
Kombat soundtrack. I used to listen to that in high school, and I roll my windows down, and as soon as that music would hit, like it was just so like hard hitting. I mean, I would just be like in my car, like yeah, just like So yeah, I agree with you. That's a great one.
Yeah, the song Zero Signal by Fear Factory is still one of my favorite songs. And when I got to see them for I think it was the 25th anniversary of the Demanufacture album, they opened up with, they didn't open up with that, it was the second track. They played all the tracks in order, and Zero Signal was like the highlight of the night. It was amazing.
That's awesome, dude. It's so cool that if the soundtracks again they do their jobs, that they stick with you years later, decades later. And sometimes, and I'm sure you would agree with that, with this, and other people who watch this will agree that sometimes the soundtracks are better than the movies themselves. So, the music sticks out to you years later, or you're like, man, that's one hell of a soundtrack or a song, but the movie kind of sucks. So, I think we can agree to that as well. And I'm sure we can find soundtracks that we think about that with movies as well. So,
yeah, this soundtrack went platinum in less than a year. It reached number 10 on the Billboard 200. It was in the 2011 Guinness Book of World Records Gamers Edition as the most successful video game spin-off soundtrack album, and was the first electronics dance music record to receive a platinum certification in the United States.
Yeah, let's get those dancing shoes out, because they were getting ready to get our glow sticks and go to town.
That was more Mortal Kombat Annihilation. That one was straight techno.
Right. Oh man! All right, so the next one up for me will probably not be surprised. Anybody who knows me will probably get to know this channel more and more as we go. This is going to be Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. This soundtrack is what I think what probably Chris was alluding to with when 90s really hit. The soundtracks, the movies blew up, and it has a lot to do with Quentin Tarantino taking pop songs that had been the fabric of America for decades, and weaving them into his movies. So with Reservoir Dogs, you had the K-Billy super sounds of the 70s, and every time one of the guys would get into the car of the movie, that radio station was playing, and he had songs throughout the movie Reservoir Dogs, that every time they were in the car, hanging in the car, in their house, in the background, whether like on the radio or whatever, that music was playing. And of course it was purposeful and intentional, but they had so many songs that came from this that I think a lot of people had forgotten about, or became way more popular in the 90s than they were in the 70s. And I can't speak to that because I was born in the 70s, but I don't remember the 70s. But these songs had completely became part of the mainstream, and that they still show up today now. And I think you would put a lot of that on Quentin Tarantino, kind of digging these songs back up, injecting them into a movie like Reservoir Dogs, that in 2022, when they hear their songs on the radio, they don't think about 1975 or whatever when it was released. They think of the 90s when it was on the Reservoir Dogs. And they have those images of the guy getting his ear cut off in the side of the garage, or they're walking down the street in slow motion or whatever. These are the things you're going to think about from the movie, and that's that goes back to Quentin Tarantino being a master of introducing these type of songs and this type of soundtrack into a movie that the music almost is as important to the movie as the movie itself. So again, right here we have Kill Bill. I'm sorry, Kill Bill. We have Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino with K Billy, sounds of the '70s, the super sounds of the '70s. So that's one of my picks as well.
All right, so my next one comes from 1993's Judgment Night, which,
Wow, Judgment Night. Okay, all
and
right.
that one was way ahead of its time. Rap metal
Yes.
wasn't like brand new because you had, Aerosmith and Run DMC. Then you had, was it Urban Dance Squad? So if you think that Rage Against the Machine is the first band to ever have that sound, if you listen to Urban Dance Squad, it sounds like Rage Against the Machine before Rage Against the Machine. And they're Dutch, which I thought was weird. I wouldn't have expected that. But just to give you an idea of what's on here, like probably my favorite was the collaboration between Biohazard and Onyx, because I've
Yes,
always
that's
been a big Biohazard fan and I love Sticky Fingers' voice. But you also had Helmet and House of Pain, Living Color and Run DMC. You had Slayer and Ice-T, Faith No More and the Booyah Tribe, Sonic Youth and Cypress Hill, Pearl Jam and Cypress Hill, and Mudhoney and Sir Mix-a-Lot. So those were kind of the highlights off of that one. But no, that
my honey a certain slot. Talk about two completely different types of
mhm.
right. That is awesome. Yeah, that soundtrack. People don't respect that soundtrack as much as they should. You're right. Like that soundtrack is so banging. When I watch that movie again, that's probably a movie where the soundtrack's better than the movie. I think so. I like the sound. I like the movie. It was fine. Definitely a movie of the '90s. It has '90s written all over it. But that soundtrack, man, you're right. Nice. So here's one talking about the soundtrack or the orchestra or the music made for the movie. That's probably I don't know. For me personally, the movie. This is the only movie that this director's made that I like, but a lot of it has to do with the soundtrack more than the movie itself. And this is probably going to get some people get their butt hurt, but it is the Goblin soundtrack for Suspiria. So Goblin's an Italian group that did the score for this movie, and the music. If you know the score of this movie, it is very, very like foreboding, creepy, scary. It sounds like like the soundtrack of some like Grimm's fairy tales. It is so disturbing. They interweave like this creepy words into the songs that they're playing. That they're saying stuff like witch and get her, but it's so weaved into the music you can barely make it out. And the main theme song of Suspiria, when they released the trailer back in '70 whatever 6 or whatever '77, the soundtrack was the music for the trailer was so like just otherworldly. People just were really drawn to this movie, and the colors that Argento paints with this is absolutely amazing. And so, I highly recommend. The soundtrack is awesome. It's a soundtrack. I love this soundtrack so much. Whenever we do Halloween, I usually just pull up Suspiria's soundtrack and play it in the background while we're handing out candy, because everybody's just like, "Oh, that's just feels otherworldly. It just seems so strange, and it kind of makes you feel like, like you're not on Earth. It just seems like you're in this like this other level or layer." And Goblin did a great job with the score on this one, in my opinion. So there you go.
All right, yeah, you had sent me not too long ago some tracks from that, and you're 100% correct. It's unsettling.
Yes.
But I tried to watch Suspiria years ago. It wasn't my thing. So if you hadn't have sent me those couple tracks that you did, I probably would be clueless as to what you're talking about right now. But no, I really enjoyed that. The next on my list is the soundtrack from the movie Spawn. And
Okay.
just like Judgment Night, you had a heavy metal band with a, techno industrial band. So you had Filter and the Crystal Method, Marilyn Manson and the Sneaker Pimps, Orbital and Kirk Hammett, Korn and the Dust Brothers, Butthole Surfers and Moby, Metallica and DJ Spooky, Stabbing Westward and Wink, Prodigy and Tom Morello, Silverchair and Vitro, Henry Rollins and Goldie, and Incubus and DJ Greyboy. I remember hearing years ago, because I used to read like all the Hit Parader and Metal Maniacs magazines, but there was a big rift between Manson and the Sneaker Pips. Those bands did not like each other at all, and I don't know why, but I just remember that was a thing. Like they vowed never to work together again.
Is it? I would. Yeah, I would. Well, maybe Marilyn Manson will have time to talk about it when he'll be writing his autobiography from prison soon. So he'll tell us all about it.
But speaking of Filter, did you know that the lead singer of Filter, Richard Patrick, is the brother of the actor Robert Patrick?
Hey, man, nice shot. I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a video of Robert Patrick on stage with Richard, and that dude was like completely out of his element. I think he just said "fuck" over and over and over and over again because he didn't know what else to do.
Yeah, well, you don't know what else to do. Fall back on the least common denominator of just saying that. Yeah.
I'm gonna swear, and it's gonna get everybody excited, and people.
Exactly, you know, just start swearing. People are like, yeah, and it's funny how that works. Like, if you just get up in front of a bunch of people and you just start swearing, like somehow that like gets you over. People just like it, like, yeah, that's right, man. F this. Everybody's just like going off. You're like, that's all I got to do to like get the crowd to like be on my side. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Pretty funny. But that's I never thought. I don't know. I can honestly say Spawn again. Not a movie I'm a fan of necessarily. The soundtrack. Now that you mentioned those bands, I might have to go back. I don't really remember it because that's probably because I never really sat down and watched Spawn except probably one time in like '96 or whenever it was released or whatever. So I probably need to give it another shot. But I definitely want to hear the soundtrack. So I'm gonna be on the trial for that now. So yeah, okay. Next up, this is kind of in the same line with Suspiria. They also have music in this movie. There's also music that they pull from like Muzak from the '70s, and this is Dawn of the Dead. George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. So Goblin does the soundtrack for this as well, but this music is very, very unique. As soon as you hear this music, you know this is Dawn of the Dead's music. There's just so many sounds and music and scores and like this little sounds of the guitars or whatever that just goes, wow, that's the soundtrack of Dawn of the Dead. It has so many great moments in here with the music. I just absolutely love. And again, it's the music is by Goblin, and also Dario Argento, I guess, does something with the music as well with this, which is interesting. But Dawn of the Dead, I mean, again, there's not much I can say with this one. I think this is a pretty well-known music. The movie itself is super well-known. But again, it's the soundtrack. As soon as I hear any 2 seconds of any kind of music, I already know immediately this is from Dawn of the Dead. The soundtrack's very unique to itself. It doesn't sound like anything else. This is probably the best soundtrack for a George A. Romero movie, in my opinion. I feel like this is probably the best one of them all. So yeah, it's just different, definitely very good, in my opinion, soundtrack. One of the best from a horror movie, in my opinion.
All right, so the next one I have is a movie that I talked about on the last Under the Radar, and that is the soundtrack for Eddie and the Cruisers. And as you were talking about, soundtracks kind of propping up a movie, what had happened was they were supposed to release this in the summer of '83, but it got delayed until September. And all the families and the kids were back in school, and it only made like 4 million during like the 3 weeks they had it out, so they ended up pulling it. But HBO picked it up the next year, and as people started getting VCRs, it actually had a resurgence, and the soundtrack ended up in the top 10. It was on the Billboard 100, and it kind of turned that movie into a cult classic. But as I was describing it before, it's kind of it's 60s sound with like an 80s flair to it.
Okay.
The primary song that most people would remember was "On the Dark Side." That one I think made it into the top 10, maybe top 20. But most of the songs on this movie were recorded by John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band, which the movie generated their career because they'd been out for a few years, but they were just playing bars and clubs and small scale stuff. But aside from the music that they provided for the movie, you had "Runaway" by Del Shannon, "Sleepwalk" by Johnny Farina, and "Betty Lou's Got a New Pair of Shoes," which was Bobby Freeman. But yeah, so the music was so far ahead of its time, and the recording quality was fantastic. The musicianship was amazing. Definitely worth checking out. And this
I'm gonna check it out again.
Own on vinyl.
What was that?
So this is one I actually own on vinyl.
Nice. Look at you rocking the vinyl, dude.
I'd show it to you, but it's in America.
All right. Well, we'll just have to keep you. We'll just have to get you to show us that in a year or so, right? So my last one, I'm gonna show off is another Quentin Tarantino soundtrack. It's one that weaves in music with period commercials in the soundtrack. And this is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I love this soundtrack so much that I bought the CD already. So this is the actual soundtrack. But he did this he's done this in other movies, but this is the one that's where it's so pronounced that you have period legit commercials that he pulled off the radio and have them intertwined with his own soundtrack for the movie. And again, every time Brad Pitt's in his car driving through Hollywood, or every time Leonardo DiCaprio's in his house with the radio going or whatever, music is in the background the entire time, and it's of the 1960, I think 9 Hollywood. And it's very purposeful. He what do you say? He was purposeful in the finding the appropriate time that this music was played during this time of the summer of, I believe, in '69 when the Manson family murders happened. And then he picking the soundtrack. I'm sorry, the commercials that were being played at that time, and it was just absolutely amazing. It feels like you're literally in a time capsule when you listen to the soundtrack of the late '60s, and it's something that it's very hard to replicate. I think most directors or sound composers or sound whatever musicians, I think on their own would find it very difficult to pull this off. But Quentin Tarantino, just because I think he's a genius when it comes to stuff like this. It just feels so natural and just completely puts you in that mind space of that time frame. Like, I listen to this music in my car all the time, and I feel like I am in the '60s. It is absolutely an amazing experience, and I don't think you can do that with a lot of soundtracks or a lot of movies that makes you feel that in that headspace. So there you go.
Yeah, I never really thought of that soundtrack in that capacity, but as you're explaining it, I can picture and remember exactly what you're talking about. The little jingles
Yes.
that they modified. No, that was a neat dynamic.
I mean, they even had Adam West and Burt Ward at the very end cut a promo from the Batman TV show talking about watch Batman on the local Los Angeles station and see if you can find our special hidden message for a backstage opportunity to come and meet us filming Batman and get a color TV. I mean, it's like unbelievable. Like he cut that out of a real promo from I guess '69, and then inserted it into the soundtrack. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like the level of detail is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and you said you knew the guy that Brad Pitt's character was portraying, correct?
What about it?
Didn't you know him?
Well, he's portraying a very famous, I guess, type of stuntman that Quentin Tarantino had always put over in Hollywood. That's one of those, and I think it might have been like a combination of two different guys. I personally didn't know who they were, but I knew where he's pulling it from.
I see.
And he talks about this in his behind the scenes stuff, which I'm sure we ever talk about this movie. We'll do his name in the movie is Cliff Booth, but yeah, so he's I believe the way I understood correctly, he kind of took two well-known stuntmen and kind of put them together to make this kind of character. Of course, he embellishes on a whole lot of it, but the fact of the matter is that's kind of the way he took this like typical Hollywood stuntman and his journey that parallels with the actor that he's working with. Because he used to be the main stuntman for this guy from a TV show from the 50s and 60s. So yeah. What about you? What's the one you're gonna end on?
I am gonna go ahead and close it out with the Dazed and Confused soundtrack.
Such a great one, dude. Yes.
There was so much on there. I mean, Foghat, Black Oak, Arkansas, ZZ Top. Love Hurts by Nazareth, which is amazing. Sweet War, Leonard Skinner, Deep Purple, Aerosmith. They had the two different versions. They had the blue one and the pink one. Yep. I only ever had the blue one, and I stole it from my sister. I wanted the pink one because it had the Aerosmiths.
Excuse me.
But no, that. I'm not much of a 70s music person, but I love the Dazed and Confused soundtrack.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a 70s person either. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of that 70s rock and roll, but there's a couple songs like in Dazed and Confused that when you cherry pick some of the songs from the 70s, I can get on board with that. But just like certain bands, everybody's like CCR or whatever, and Led Zeppelin, I'm kind of like, meh. All right. So yeah, I agree with you. That's a heck of a soundtrack.
But this is almost like the score to the movie, and I can't imagine how much that had to have cost to get the rights to use all those bands. Because when you're talking bands like Black Sabbath and Kiss and ZZ Top, that doesn't come cheap.
No, but the other thing is that soundtrack, again, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, is that soundtrack makes that movie. Now that movie's a great movie. But if you take that soundtrack out and you do it with a score instead, like a 70s based score, and that's not the same movie.
Right.
So that soundtrack makes that movie or whatever. So I agree with you on that. Like, you have to have that soundtrack to make that movie as powerful as it comes across, as a time capsule of like 1978 or 77 or wherever it's supposed to be. I don't know when it's supposed to take place, but yes.
Yeah, the way they weaved it into the movie, because this is stuff coming out of their car stereos, you know what I mean? So yeah. it gave that element of realism. It felt authentic.
And that's what we talked about. At least for me, almost all the music that I have shown, like with Quentin Tarantino for sure, it's like it's coming out of the radio. It's coming out of the car, out of the radio that's in the house or the apartment. It's a factor through the entire movie itself. So it's just not just in the background, like thumping in the background the whole time. You're just, it takes, like it's out of the movie almost. So yeah, I agree.
Kind of like American Graffiti.
Yeah. Yes. American Graffiti. George Lucas's seminal American Graffiti. Yeah,
a young Ron
That's
Howard.
That's probably the best movie he's ever directed.
Yeah, I hurt some feelings with that one.
Yeah, well, time to get hurt. You better better put on some Kevlar because shots are being fired. So, oh man. But yeah, this is really fun, Chris. I know you had mentioned this. I don't know if you mentioned this on a past episode or we mentioned it off camera about doing soundtracks, but I think that's something you and I can revisit from time to time, and we'll just talk about maybe some of our favorite soundtracks, some of our favorite scores, or whatever, and just how it's either makes or breaks a movie in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So I like this. I hope other people enjoyed this episode. Any parting words from you, sir?
I would say if you like this video, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment.
Sure.
What soundtracks did we miss? Which
Yes.
soundtracks did you like? Which soundtracks did you did not like? And definitely, if you want to make a response video, do so and leave a link in the comments.
Yeah, it's really important to leave a link. I know I've had a few people say they enjoyed it. They said they want to participate or they want to share their whatever to me. But you got to make sure if you want to do that, put a link at the below so we can find it, click on it, and go to it, and then we'll definitely reference in the next video or something so we can say, oh hey, so and so they responded with this. So because obviously Chris and I, we're always learning as well. We're always trying to gain more information. So there's an opportunity for you to share your picks. That'd be awesome. And we obviously miss stuff. So yeah, that'd be great. So I agree with Chris. That's great. So guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for getting through this, and let us know, like Chris said, some of your picks or your favorites. If you don't do a video, maybe list them below. Some of your favorites, and that way we can reference those as well. So until next time, thank you for watching, and we will see you on the flip side.